inside you right now, um, there are basically trillions of microscopic water balloons.
Yeah, those are your cells.
Right, your cells. And if you were to drink, I don't know, a massive, oversized jug of water, all of those tiny balloons should logically just swell up and pop.
Which would be catastrophic, obviously.
Exactly. Or on the flip side, if you sit down and eat an entire family-sized bag of salty potato chips, those balloons should have all their water sucked out, right? Like they should shrivel into tiny little raisins.
But they don't, and that's the miracle of it.
They really don't. So today we're going on a deep dive into the source material to uncover why. Specifically, we're looking at an incredibly detailed physiology text, chapter 29 to be exact.
It's a fantastic chapter. It really gets into the weeds.
It does. Our mission today is to understand this hidden microscopic machinery that prevents you from essentially exploding or drying out from the inside. We want to see how the body balances water and salt so perfectly.
And it really is a phenomenal biological balancing act. Because whether you just chugged a gallon of water or, spent the entire day hiking in the desert sun without a single drop, your cells stay perfectly plump.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And to make sense of how your body pulls off this dynamic high wire act, we really have to start with the foundational concept that drives all of it, which is osmolarity.
Okay, let's unpack that, because osmolarity sounds like a really dense textbook term, but it's basically just a crowd control metric, right?
Yeah, that's actually a really good way to frame it. Think of osmolarity as a measure of how crowded a fluid is with microscopic particles.
Right, salt.
Exactly. Mostly sodium, chloride, and other dissolved solutes, all relative to the amount of water they're floating in. We measure this crowding in a unit called a millismol.
Okay, millismol.
Yeah, and don't let the word intimidate you. If you have a high number of millismoles, you have a highly concentrated, very salty fluid.
Right.
And if you have a low number, you have a very dilute, watery fluid. Your body has to keep the osmolarity of your blood and fluids incredibly stable, hovering right around 300 millismoles per liter.
Because if that ratio gets thrown off, water starts moving rapidly across your cell walls to try and even things out, right?
It's exactly.
And if that water rushes into your brain cells or rushes out of your heart cells, you are in immediate life-threatening danger.
Which brings us directly to the kidneys. They're the frontline defenders of this balance.
So let's look at the extremes to see how they work. Let's say you just finished a workout and drank an enormous surplus of water.
Okay, so your blood is suddenly getting watered down.
Right. The osmolarity is just plummeting. The source material notes that a healthy kidney shifts into high gear and can excrete up to 20 liters of dilute urine a day to dump that excess water.
20 liters. That is a massive volume.
It really is. And it can dilute that urine down to just 50 millismoles per liter.
And remember, normal body fluid is around 300 millismoles. So the kidneys are pushing out urine that is basically a sixth as concentrated as your blood.
So it's nearly pure water.
Almost, yeah.
But wait, how does it physically do that without flushing out all the essential electrolytes your body actually needs? If 20 liters of fluid are washing through the system, shouldn't you be losing massive amounts of sodium and potassium?
You'd think so, but that's the genius of the kidney's internal plumbing. As that massive volume of fluid flows through the microscopic tubes in the kidney, specifically what we call the distal tubules, the kidney performs a very aggressive sorting process.
Right. I was trying to picture the sorting process while reading the text. And the analogy that came to mind is that it's like a nightclub bouncer.
Oh, a bouncer. Okay, I like that.
Yeah, so the bouncer is letting all the ordinary guests, which is the excess water, just leave out the back door. But they're physically holding back the VIPs, the solutes, the sodium, and potassium.
Yeah, right.
They hold them back so the party inside the club doesn't just die out.
That is a perfect analogy. The workers, or the bouncers, are actively rescuing the solutes while letting the water wash away. Now, if you've ever gone to the doctor for a physical and had to, pee in a plastic cup.
Oh, yeah. We've all been there.
Right. You've likely encountered how we try to measure this concentration in the real world. Doctors frequently use a quick dipstick test called urine-specific gravity.
I've always wondered what exactly they were looking for when they do that test.
Well, they're trying to estimate your osmolarity, and most of the time, specific gravity correlates perfectly with true osmolarity. But the text makes a point to distinguish between the two.
Why is that?
Because specific gravity measures the weight and the size of the molecules in your urine. True osmolarity, however, is strictly about the absolute number of microscopic particles, regardless of how big or heavy they are.
Oh, I see. So it's kind of the difference between weighing a room full of people versus just counting how many bodies are actually in the room.
Perfectly stated, yes. So if a patient has large, heavy molecules spilling into their urine, say, large glucose molecules in an uncontrolled diabetic, or even heavy antibiotic molecules.
That dipstick test is going to get thrown off.
Exactly. The test for specific gravity will read artificially high. The urine will weigh more, making the doctor think the urine is highly concentrated.
Wow, okay.
But if you actually counted the particles, the true osmolarity might be completely normal.
That is a critical distinction, especially in a clinical setting. So, okay, we've established how the body dumps water. But the kidney doesn't just decide to do this on its own, right?
No, it definitely doesn't.
Something has to tell those bouncers to open the back door and let the water escape. What is actually pulling the levers here?
The master lever in this entire operation is antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. You'll also hear it called vasopressin in some contexts.
ADH, okay.
Yeah, ADH is the body's primary water-conserving signal. When the blood in your body becomes too salty, meaning your osmolarity rises above that 300 mark we talked about, your brain secretes a surge of ADH into your bloodstream.
And when that ADH hits the kidneys, it acts like a chemical key, doesn't it?
It does. It unlocks special physical channels,
Yeah.
basically microscopic water doors, in the walls of those kidney tubes.
So suddenly the doors are open and the water can flow freely out of the tubes and rush back into the salty tissue of the body.
Right. The water is saved, and what's left inside the tube is a very small volume of incredibly concentrated urine.
But there is a hard biological ceiling on this rescue operation, which I found fascinating in the reading.
Oh, absolutely.
The absolute maximum concentration a human kidney can possibly achieve is between 1,200 and 1,400 millismoles per liter.
That's our hard limit.
And here is where we hit something called the obligatory urine volume, which has some pretty intense implications for survival.
Yeah, it really does, because every single day, simply by existing and metabolizing food, your body generates chemical waste products that absolutely must be cleared out.
You can't just keep them inside.
No. And that waste totals about 600 millismoles every single day.
So let's run the math on that. If your kidneys can only pack a maximum of 1,200 millismoles of solute into a single liter of water, and you have to clear 600 millismoles of waste.
Your body is mathematically forced to excrete at least half a liter of water every single day just to carry that waste out.
Right, you cannot physically excrete that waste completely dry. It has to be dissolved in something.
Exactly. So if you are stranded somewhere and you aren't drinking at least half a liter of water to replace that loss, dehydration is completely inevitable.
Your body will literally drain its own cells to wash away the trash.
It will. It highlights how bound we are by our specific biology. If you look at the animal kingdom, you see vastly different limits.
Like the beaver, right?
Yeah, beavers, who spend their lives surrounded by fresh water, have terribly inefficient kidneys. Their concentration limit is just 500 millismoles. They just don't need to save water.
But then you contrast that with the Australian hopping mouse. This part of the source text was wild.
Oh, it's incredible.
This tiny creature lives in the scorching desert and can concentrate its urine to an unbelievable 10,000 millismoles per liter.
10,000?
Yeah. Its kidneys are so ruthlessly efficient at pulling water back into the body that the mouse can survive its entire life without ever drinking a single drop of liquid water.
It extracts all the hydration it needs just from the dry seeds it eats.
Which is insane.
It is, but we simply don't have the internal machinery for that level of conservation.
Well, speaking of our internal limitations, I have to push back on a classic survival rule we all hear. Never drink seawater.
Okay, let's hear it.
So seawater has an osmolarity of about 1,200 millismoles per liter, but you just said our maximum concentrating ability is also 1,200 millismoles per liter.
Right, it is.
So mathematically, why does drinking seawater dehydrate us? Shouldn't it just be a wash? Like, I drink a liter of seawater, I process it, and I pee out a liter of seawater. Net zero.
On paper, I totally get why it looks like a wash. Until you remember the metabolic waste we just talked about.
Oh, right. The daily trash.
Exactly. Yes, drinking 1 liter of seawater forces your body to process 1,200 millismoles of pure salt. But your kidney doesn't get to dedicate all its processing power just to that salt. It still has to take out that daily trash, specifically a waste product called urea.
Ah, okay. So the salt takes up the kidney's maximum capacity, but the urea is still standing there waiting in line.
Yes. Urea takes up roughly half of that 1,200 maximum capacity. so about 600 millismoles per liter, which means the kidney can only fit 600 millismoles of the seawater salt into a single liter of urine.
Oh, wow.
To clear the full 1,200 millismoles of salt you swallowed from that single liter of seawater, your body has to generate 1.5 liters of urine.
So you drank 1 liter, but you are forced to pee out 1.5 liters.
Yes. You are actively, aggressively dehydrating yourself by drinking it.
That is a brutal biological trap. So, okay, we know our hard limit is 1,200 millismoles, but how does the kidney physically build up such an extreme concentration of salt in its own tissue to pull that water back into the body?
To understand the how, we have to look at the physical engine of the kidney. We call it the loop of Henle, and it uses a mechanism known as the countercurrent multiplier.
Countercurrent multiplier.
Right. Inside your kidneys are millions of these microscopic U-shaped tubes that dive deep down into the inner core of the kidney, an area called the renal medulla.
So the fluid flows down one side, which the text calls the descending limb, makes a sharp U-turn at the bottom, and flows back up the other side, the ascending limb.
And here's the absolute magic of the system. The two sides have completely different properties. As fluid flows up the ascending limb, powerful cellular pumps actively shove salt out of the tube and into the surrounding tissue of the medulla.
Okay.
But crucially, the walls of this ascending limb are completely waterproof.
Waterproof. So you are pumping dry salt into the surrounding kidney tissue without letting any water follow it.
Exactly.
The way I picture this countercurrent multiplier from the reading is it's like an endless loop on a ski lift.
A ski lift? Okay, paint the picture for me.
So the chairs on the lift, which represent the fluid, keep bringing more and more skiers up the mountain. The skiers are the salt.
Okay.
But instead of leaving, all the skiers get off the leash and pack into the lodge at the top. The lodge is the medulla. So it's multiplying the crowd until it's just completely packed with salt.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. The continuous flow, combined with the constant dropping off of the skiers, the active pumping, multiplies the concentration far beyond what a single pump could ever achieve on its own.
But wait, doesn't this create a massive logistical problem?
You're thinking of the blood supply, aren't you?
Exactly. This deep kidney tissue is alive. It needs oxygen and nutrients delivered by the bloodstream.
It does.
But normally, when blood flows through tissue, it acts like a river, right? It washes away whatever solutes are there. So how does the blood deliver oxygen without washing away this carefully constructed mountain of salt in the lodge?
It all comes down to the bizarre shape of the blood vessels down there, known as the vasa recta. They don't just flow straight through the tissue and leave.
They mimic the U shape of the loops of Henle.
Precisely. These capillaries dive deep into the salty medulla, make a hairpin turn, and flow right back up. We call them countercurrent exchangers.
Okay, exchangers.
And the blood flow inside them is intentionally sluggish. As the blood flows down into the salty depths, simple diffusion causes salt to seep into the blood.
It picks up the salt?
Yes. But because it makes that U-turn and flows right back up toward the less salty outer areas of the kidney, that extra salt simply diffuses right back out into the tissue before the blood vessel exits the area entirely.
So the blood essentially bars the salt on the way down and then politely returns it on the way up.
Exactly. It delivers the necessary oxygen to the cells, but leaves the salt mountain completely undisturbed.
That is unbelievably efficient. But while digging into this salty trap in the text, there's a detail that totally caught me off guard.
Oh yeah? Which part?
We just talked about urea as metabolic trash, right? Like the whole reason we can't drink seawater. But it turns out the kidney actually recycles it.
Oh yes, it does. We view urea as waste, but the kidney leverages it as a tool. Urea actually contributes to roughly 40 to 50% of the kidney's water-saving power.
Wait, it really? Half of its power?
Yeah. When you are severely dehydrated and your ADH levels are high, the kidney opens special channels that allow urea to passively diffuse out of the urine and into that salty tissue we talked about.
So it's basically taking the trash and piling it onto the salt mountain to make it even bigger.
Exactly. It traps the urea deep in the kidney tissue to artificially increase the total osmolarity. And that higher concentration pulls even more water out of the descending side of the loop, saving it for the body.
That's brilliant.
It is. This is actually why people on high-protein diets who naturally produce much more urea as a byproduct of breaking down protein actually have a mathematically better ability to concentrate their urine than someone suffering from malnutrition.
Okay, so what does this all mean for us? The kidney is an absolute marvel of engineering, but at the end of the day, it's just plumbing, right?
Basically, yes.
It has no brain. It doesn't know you just ran a marathon. It doesn't know you just chugged a gallon of water. It needs instructions.
Right, which means we have to shift our focus from the plumbing in the lower back to the supercomputer in the head.
The osmoreceptors and the sensation of thirst.
Exactly. The command center for this entire operation is located deep in the brain, in a region called the hypothalamus.
The text mentions the AV3V region specifically, right?
Yes. Packed into this area are specialized neurons known as osmoreceptors, and the way they measure the saltiness of your blood relies on incredibly straightforward physics.
They literally shrink.
They do.
When your blood gets too concentrated, like too many salt particles and not enough water osmosis draws water straight out of these brain cells, they physically shrivel up like deflating balloons.
And that physical shrinkage is the trigger for the whole system.
Right, but how does a shrinking cell actually send a message? The book explained that when the cell loses water and shrivels, its outer membrane physically stretches and deforms.
Correct.
And that physical tugging pulls open microscopic trapdoors on the surface of the cell. Suddenly, positively charged particles from outside the cell rush in, and that sudden shift in electrical charge shoots a spark in action potential down the nerve wire.
That electrical spark travels straight to the pituitary gland, commanding it to release the ADH hormone into the blood, starting the whole water-saving process in the kidneys.
Wow.
What is truly astounding here is the sensitivity of these shrinking cells. We have other sensors in the body that measure total blood volume and blood pressure, alerting the brain if you are bleeding, for instance. But it takes a massive 10% drop in your total blood volume to trigger a significant ADH rescue response.
Contrast that with osmolarity. The source text points out that a microscopic change of just 1% in the concentration of your blood is enough to cause those cells to shrink, fire an electrical spark, and flood your system with ADH.
And that exact same 1% change is what triggers the conscious sensation of thirst. The threshold for driving you to seek out water is tripped by a tiny increase in your blood sodium, just 2 milliequivalents per liter.
It's so sensitive.
Once you cross that microscopic line, your brain sounds the alarm and you feel an overwhelming, undeniable urge to drink.
But if we think about the logistics of drinking, this introduces a major physiological lag.
How so?
Let's say I'm working in the yard, I'm incredibly thirsty, and I chug a huge glass of ice water. It takes anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes for that water to actually pass through my stomach, get absorbed by my gut, and physically dilute my blood.
Which presents a very dangerous problem. If your brain's thirst center only turned off when your blood concentration physically returned to normal an hour later, you would spend that entire hour continuously chugging water.
You would overhydrate to a lethal degree.
Yes, you would.
You'd water down your blood so much that those trillions of microscopic balloons we talked about earlier would swell up and burst. So, if thirst is strictly a chemical alarm bell in the brain, why does simply wetting my dry mouth and feeling the cold water in my throat feel instantly satisfying, way before the water ever hits my bloodstream?
That's because you are experiencing the body's anticipatory metering system.
Metering system.
Yeah. As you swallow, the physical stretching of your esophagus and the wetting of the mucous membranes in your mouth send immediate rapid-fire nerve signals back to the thirst center in your brain.
Oh, so it acts as a temporary override switch.
Exactly. The brain registers the physical act of drinking and says, okay, the water's in the mail. We can turn off the thirst alarm for now.
It buys the digestive system time to process the water and provide the actual chemical relief.
It is a beautifully calibrated system.
It really is. But, like any complex machinery, the components can fail. Let's look at what the text says about what happens when this brain-kidney communication breaks down.
Okay, yeah.
There's a condition called diabetes insipidus, which is effectively what happens when the ADH master switch is broken.
And we should clarify right away, this has absolutely nothing to do with diabetes mellitus, which is the blood sugar disease people usually think of.
Right, completely different.
Diabetes insipidus is strictly a massive water balance failure, and it manifests in 2 distinct ways. The first is central diabetes insipidus. This occurs when there is physical trauma to the brain or an infection, and the hypothalamus loses the ability to manufacture ADH.
So the physical spark fires from the shrinking cells, but no chemical message is ever actually sent.
Precisely.
So the kidney's back doors stay permanently open and the water just violently washes out.
Exactly. The other variant is nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. In this scenario, the brain is perfectly healthy and pumping out ADH. But the kidney machinery is damaged and refuses to acknowledge the signal.
What causes that?
This can be caused by intrinsic kidney disease or very often by certain medications like lithium, which is used for bipolar disorder.
And the physical reality of living with either form is just staggering. Without ADH locking those doors, a person can excrete up to 15 liters of extremely dilute urine every single day.
It's debilitating.
Because their thirst mechanism is still fully operational, right? So their life becomes an endless cycle of chugging huge volumes of water just to outpace the massive fluid loss and avoid lethal dehydration.
Now, when discussing system failures and balance, the text makes sure to address a very common misunderstanding regarding a completely different hormone, aldosterone.
Oh, yeah, the aldosterone misconception.
Many people, including some health professionals, incorrectly assume aldosterone regulates how concentrated your blood is.
But the physiological data in Chapter 29 is crystal clear. It does not.
No, it doesn't. Aldosterone's job is to save sodium. It stops sodium from being peed out. But we have to remember the golden rule of this internal plumbing.
Water follows salt.
Water follows salt. When aldosterone saves sodium, osmotic pressure ensures it pulls water back into the blood right alongside it.
Because the water follows the salt in equal measure, you are expanding the total volume of fluid in your body, so your blood pressure goes up. But the concentration, the ratio of salt to water, remains completely unchanged.
Exactly. The ADH and thirst system, driven by those shrinking brain cells, is the one and only master of concentration.
Which brings me to a behavioral drive that honestly feels like a glitch in the matrix to me, our appetite for salt.
Oh, the salt craving.
Yeah, we are evolutionarily wired to crave it. But the dietary math presented in the sources is shocking. A human being only needs to consume a tiny amount, roughly 10 to 20 milliequivalents of sodium a day to survive.
A very small amount.
Right. And a milliequivalent is just how we measure the dietary charge of these particles. But the point is, 10 to 20 is minuscule. Yet the average person eating a modern, industrialized diet is consuming 100 to 200 milliequivalents a day.
We are eating 10 times what we need.
10 times. The gap between our biological requirement and our modern intake is astronomical.
It is.
And here's where I have to push back on our biology a bit. If our kidneys and our brain are so incredibly brilliant, if they can detect a 1% shift in blood concentration, why on earth does our brain have such a fundamentally flawed, insatiable behavioral drive for salt that pushes us to eat 10 times what we actually require?
Well, the text suggests it's not a flaw. It's a severe case of evolutionary lag.
Evolutionary lag.
Yeah. In the natural world, particularly for herbivores, sodium is incredibly rare. Having a powerful, overriding behavioral drive to seek out and consume salt whenever you stumble across it was a massive survival advantage.
Oh, I see.
If an ancient ancestor found a salt lick, they gorged themselves because they had no idea when they would find sodium again.
So the craving software isn't broken, it's just hopelessly outdated for the environment we live in today. We are walking around with the brain wiring of a foraging herbivore desperate for a scarce mineral, but we live in a modern landscape overflowing with fast food, salted pretzels, and processed meals.
Precisely. We have engineered an environment that provides an endless, cheap supply of a resource our primitive brain still fiercely treats as a rare survival commodity.
Wow. If we step back and look at everything we've unpacked today from the text, I mean, we started with the massive volume of water the kidney can process, rescuing the VIP salutes while letting the excess wash away.
Yep, the bouncers.
We explored the master key, ADH, and the sheer mechanical genius of the countercurrent multiplier, those opposing ski lifts building a massive mountain of salt deep in the kidney.
Even scavenging our own urea trash to maximize our water-saving power.
Right. And we tracked it all back to those microscopic osmoreceptor cells in the brain that physically shrivel up to sound the alarm for thirst.
It is a profoundly elegant loop. Your brain monitors the concentration, your behavior adjusts the intake, and the microscopic architecture of the kidney continuously adapts the output.
It really is a masterpiece of biological engineering. But before we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder on your own.
All right.
We just established that our intense, lingering craving for salt is an ancient survival circuit firing in a modern world. But considering our daily diet forcefully delivers up to 10 times the salt we biologically require, are we effectively hijacking our own biology?
That's a serious question.
Day in and day out, we are flooding this perfectly calibrated system with massive excesses of sodium. As we force our kidneys to constantly operate at the absolute extreme limits of their design just to clear the salt we keep throwing at them. What might be the unseen long-term evolutionary toll on this delicate brain-kidney partnership?
Yeah, if you constantly run an engine in the red zone, eventually something has to give. It raises profound questions about the limits of our physiological adaptability.
It sure does, because at the end of the day, those trillions of microscopic water balloons inside you are entirely reliant on that biological engine holding strong. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.